Good morning, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Mike Taylor. I'm the Task Force Senior Trainer for the WARHOG Maneuver Team here at the Joint Multinational Readiness Center, Hohenfels, Germany. We just finished up with Exercise Allied Spirit 25, and I'm sitting down with Lieutenant Eli Cabrera, a platoon leader from Delta Company 1503, part of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, but was operating underneath a Lithuanian brigade, the Griffin Brigade, during Exercise Allied Spirit. Thanks for sitting down with us, Eli. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience so far in the Army?
Of course, sir. So, full name, Elijah Cabrera, First Lieutenant Elijah Cabrera. I went to Arizona State University, commissioned through ROTC. Got my degree in political science, and then spent about 6 months in recruiting command. Went back to Phoenix, Arizona, did a little bit of recruiting there. Then I went to IBOLC, did my 7 months of IBOLC training. Came out, went to Ranger School, failed Ranger School, came out to Italy. Then I was like, you know what, I got to do that thing again. So I went back, completed Ranger School, came back, took my first platoon on the line, was in Mod Company, 1st 503rd. Spent 7 months, or about 7 months on the line. Absolutely loved it. Loved maneuvering through the forest with the boys. Had a great time. And then I just recently, about 4 months ago, moved over to heavy weapons. My experience in heavy weapons so far has been an absolutely phenomenal time. I love the guys. I love maintaining those trucks that seem to break all the time, but we'll get them fixed. And yep, now we're here. This is my second rotation. Sabre Junction was my first rotation, but I was, like I said, on the line at that time. And now I'm with the heavy weapons and just completed Allied Spirit.
So you've had the WARHOG team 2 times in the past 6 months or so. Could you describe your experience during this rotation?
So this rotation was obviously different for me because I went from the line to now in trucks with the heavy weapons. This experience was also different because our whole battalion wasn't here. As you probably know already, the flow of communication is probably a little different from being with your internal battalion to then being under the Lithuanians or working with your Italian partners or working with 191. The communication is just I don't want to say it's an atmosphere, but I want to say it's kind of just learning how to work with your partnering forces type deal. So that was interesting to learn.
What did you find most challenging about the exercise?
That piece right there, the communication with your partnering units. I think as the Army as a whole, we all know how to operate, especially out here. We all know our job and we all know our roles. But learning how to communicate with 191, with the Lithuanians, with the Italians, that is where things become challenging. Just that communication barrier is like the thing that all of us have to really sit down and try to figure out.
Yeah, that's a unique challenge here at the Joint Multinational Readiness Center that isn't maybe evident at the National Training Center or the Joint Readiness Training Center, where we have these, our partners and allies often here as part of the exercise. With Delta Company 1503, during this exercise, you also had an Italian tank platoon with the company. How did that integration go?
To be quite frank with you, sir, we had to wait for them a lot. They are slow. Those tanks are slow. But you know what? They were the backbone of actually our element, because whenever there was some type of enemy force coming in on us, we relied heavily on those to come to the front lines with us and basically hold the sport with us. I myself didn't work with the Italians. It was another platoon leader. But I always had to know where they were in time and space, and I always had to know basically my frontline trace with theirs. Because if anything went south, it was all of our responsibilities to run to those tanks, communicate how to maneuver them, and how to best employ them into the fight. If enemy were coming from either the north or south, it was all of our jobs to know where they were so we could move them as our basically like the backbone of our element.
Yeah, it was for sure a significant amount of firepower having a tank platoon embedded into the company as part of the overall task force. So yeah, I'm sure that it was, you guys considered it a critical part of both the company and then probably the entire brigade, to be quite frank. What surprised you the most about the rotation?
But I think what surprised me the most is actually how lethal our partnering forces are, i.e. the Czechs and the Lithuanians and the Italians. Obviously, being an American force, we don't get to work with them day to day, and being out here in Europe is probably the only time you'll directly get to work with them one-on-one in a training event. I'm sure a lot of people in America don't get the same experience, but actually watching the Czechs and the Lithuanians and the Italians in battle, they surprised me. They surprised me to give them a purpose, to give them an intent. When I needed the Italians to do something, or whenever I came in contact with some Lithuanian engineers and I needed a job done, I was surprised by how fast they got that done and how well they communicated their progress.
For your role as a platoon leader, how did you tackle troop leading procedures throughout the exercise?
Kind of interesting for me. I know every leader has their own way of doing things, but in terms of how I tackled my troop leading procedures is, I wouldn't say I like go through it like Ranger handbook step by step. I receive a plan. I think critically about the plan. I bring in my leaders to make sure that common sense is like being met. And then once I come up with a plan, I run it by all the leaders once more, and then I disseminate it down to the others. And it's always worked for me. It seems like a lot of other leaders kind of do the same thing. So as long as there's a common base of knowledge around, I think the standards of the troop leading procedures have really been met. So
this exercise was structured a little bit differently than maybe your previous experience here at JMRC, where you spent a little bit more time in the defense prior to moving into the offense. For the defense in particular, how do you think that went, and what challenges did you face in preparing an engagement area, in support of this defense?
The biggest challenge I faced was probably the terrain. Coming from the line, coming to heavy weapons, I didn't exactly know how to maneuver tanks and heavy weapons necessarily. And then once you come in contact with what seems to be insane terrain, you have to get very, very creative with how you maneuver these elements. You have to get very creative because on the line, you can just move a company over a hill, in a file or however else you see best. But with these trucks, it almost seems like you have to run them off a cliff just to get to one, spot. So that was probably like the biggest thing for me was being able to get creative with tanks and with, Humvees. That's seemed to be a big challenge.
So just pulling that thread on getting creative with this, probably I think what you're meaning is establishing good fields of fire to make sure that you can employ the weapon systems that you've got. So how do you think that went there?
When you're planning a defense, when you're going to stay in place and you're going to defend a large area, and Dowd Company had a very large area to cover, and I was in the middle of it covering essentially a town and what you could fit a huge town in this. You don't just stay stagnant. The best way to cover all of that is to, like you said, get creative and constantly maneuver your weapon systems around, constantly move a tank, constantly move 2 trucks, constantly put them in different areas that will not only confuse the enemy, because the enemy's watching you too, not only confuse the enemy, but also finding new ways every day to kind of employ that terrain. Yeah, it was very rugged, but you can fit those trucks anywhere. Those tanks can go anywhere. Being able to be creative with the land and find new ways to hone in the enemy to where you surprise them.
How did you integrate any UAS systems or reporting that you were getting down into your platoon?
Yeah, so we just recently got some new Skydio, some UAS operators in our company, and they love it. So every opportunity I got, whether I saw, vehicles or enemy going within my engagement areas, I always sent up our UAS, always, because we can't always see everything with binoculars or, just our eyes. We can't always see everything, so you gotta use those UASs. So I've always used them. There probably wasn't a day where I didn't utilize that.
One last question. What would you recommend to another platoon leader preparing for an exercise here at the Joint Multinational Readiness Center?
I think if I was to recommend anything to like a platoon leader that was coming into, let's say, my position, or if he was going into the line, would be to analyze the terrain more. I think that's something I didn't necessarily do. I guess the first time I did, I was like, oh my God, this terrain's terrible. We're gonna have to climb all these hills. But where we were in the defense, I think actually taking more time to understand my vehicles, properly employ your vehicles in such rugged terrain is probably the key piece, because any one of us platoon leaders can get creative. That's a no-brainer. But learning how to employ those vehicles, understand the terrain, so when the time comes, you can insert and get out as fast as possible.
All right. Lieutenant Eli Cabrera, thank you for your time, your thoughts, and a great rotation here at the Joint Multinational Readiness Center.